Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons and the three companies that own Dungeons & Dragons. TSR, Wizards of the Coast, and Hasbro. And we're going to talk specifically, if you look at the history of Dungeons & Dragons from 1974 to 2019, 45 years of history, and you distill down the impact of each of those owners to a single word, what are those words and what is the meaning of that single word for each of these companies? All right, so I'm not going to bury the lead. I'll give you the words right now, all right? TSR is Genesis. Wizards of the Coast is Rescue. Hasbro is Flourish. All right. Now, let me back that up, all right? So let's talk about TSR. So TSR owned Dungeons & Dragons from 1974 to 1997, 23 years, a little more than half of the 45 years of Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons was owned by TSR. Now, when we say TSR, that's a little complex, all right? So what does that mean, TSR? Well, the reality is, between 1974 and 1997, TSR actually was 7 different separate companies, all with the letters TSR in them, right? But then with other words attached. And the reality is, the period between 1974 and 1997 for TSR was a time of incredible juxtaposition and paradox. Okay, so the reality is, really, Dungeons & Dragons, it is a truly amazing game. It's totally unique. It is a vector for art, literature, and gaming, all at the same time, right? And there's really nothing like Dungeons & Dragons. Nothing has ever, it's truly a unique product. It's been iterated many times, but I'm not sure it's ever really, truly been innovated in any significant way, right? Maybe the most significant innovation in tabletop role-playing games was probably, I would say, narrative dice, maybe the open gaming license. Those seem like true innovations, right? Now, the reality is, under TSR, Dungeons & Dragons was invented, and it was launched as a successful product, and it sold millions of copies under TSR. It did fantastically under TSR from a selling perspective. However, while the artistry under TSR was fantastic, and when I say artistry, I mean writing, I mean visual. So when I say writing, I mean the literal texts in the core rulebooks and in the modules and in the source books. Okay, when I say visual, I mean the pictures, the paintings, the etchings, the sketches, right? The drawings that are in the books, and then design, and that design is both layout and in rules, right? That is all artistry, and the artistry under TSR was fantastic. It truly was. It started a little rough, it got better and better and better, and the reality is that TSR was incredibly dedicated to artistry from the beginning to the end, right? But the reality is the business part of it, right? The bean counter, the business aspects of it were incredibly strained, and there was huge amounts of conflict between the artists within the company and the managers within the company. There was just, the artists and the artistry and the management constantly were fighting, right? And you could see, the fact that there were 7 separate TSR companies, all with TSR in their name, right? It's truly it is arguable that the business aspects of TSR were never highly successful, right? That basically good artists were driving sales, and some people were living pretty high off the hog off of those, or just not getting the timing right. Actually, I'm not sure anybody was living high off the hog off of Dungeons & Dragons. I think there was just timing issues. From a business perspective, there was timing issues, and the ebbs and flows were not managed the way they could have been, if TSR was going to still own them today, right? All right, so TSR, the reality is, The genesis is there, and the beginning of the game is there, and all of us have to be thankful to TSR. Every step of the, we can't really, no one can neglect or forget the fact that TSR, for all the business struggles that truly did exist, there is without a doubt, we owe TSR a great deal, right? For overseeing the genesis of the game, and for giving the game a 23-year head start, and allowing it to function and spread and be enjoyed for 23 years. And truly, TSR oversaw the genesis of Dungeons & Dragons, the genesis of an element of Americana, right? All right, let's talk about Wizards of the Coast. All right, so one, I want to address something right away. Wizards of the Coast only owned Dungeons & Dragons from 1997 to 1999. Now, in 1999, Hasbro comes in and they purchase Wizards of the Coast lock, stock, and barrel. They own the whole ball of wax, okay? Now, a lot of people think that when people say, oh, what's the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons? They'll say Wizards of the Coast. But the reality is, Hasbro owns Dungeons & Dragons, and Wizards of the Coast is really a sticker, right? It's really a sticker that has been used to separate Hasbro for quite a while from the ownership of Dungeons & Dragons. And one of the reasons why for that is there was the satanic panic of the 1980s, and so Hasbro is primarily a toy company, right? Has been for a long time, and Dungeons & Dragons is a pretty risky toy, right? And actually the reality is it's not even a toy, right? It's a vector. It's a vector for art, literature, and gaming, right? And it's an incredibly unusual product, right? So basically, even though Wizards of the Coast is still attached in name to Dungeons & Dragons, the reality is it has always been owned by Hasbro since 1999, right? And one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up is I think Hasbro might be getting ready to nix to rub that WotC sticker right off of Dungeons & Dragons. We saw this for the first time this year with the Stranger Things Dungeons & Dragons starter set, right? That had very bold on it. It had Hasbro Gaming, right? And it had Hasbro's name on it, right? And I think going forward, you may see Hasbro's name on a lot, if not all, of Dungeons & Dragons content, right? And that's pretty shocking, right? All right, so let's talk about the 2 very brief years that Wizards of the Coast owned Dungeons & Dragons. Now, we're going to talk about Rescue in 1 minute. So, all right, we're going to talk about Rescue. Aside from the word Rescue, I actually think Wizards of the Coast has had incredibly small amount of impact on Dungeons & Dragons. It is by far the least impacting, least important owner of Dungeons & Dragons, right? It really was. All right, now, with that said, they did do one thing that was absolutely critical, all right? So here's the 1, 2, 3, okay? So 1997, TSR has been running Dungeons & Dragons, and Dungeons & Dragons truly was a money faucet. It was, you were just like, the money was just coming out of the faucet, right? And nobody wanted to turn that dial off, right? And everybody thought that the money was going to just continue to flow and flow and flow, right? Well, the reality is in 1997, video games are starting to roll out. Technology is really coming, and this product that really had nothing to do with technology, and in my opinion, really still has virtually nothing to do with technology, right? And in fact, maybe one of the few havens we have left from technology, really starts to feel severe pressures from the changing digital technical world, right? So in 1997, basically, TSR was in a great deal of trouble, specifically, I think, from Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble had purchased, it's either Barnes & Noble or Borders. I'm pretty sure it was Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble had purchased like hundreds of thousands of their books. But Barnes & Noble had always had the option to return them, right? And when TSR had made a ton, like just a ridiculous, under TSR, I think there had been as close to over 20 different settings that have been created, right? And so there was one point, like in 1997, there was like 10 ongoing settings for Dungeons & Dragons, which were cannibalizing each other. There was just a glut of product, right? And TSR was under major threat from technology and digital sources, right? And so what happened at this point is they owed $30 million to Barnes & Noble, and at that point, they just couldn't pay it back, and they were in just a ton of trouble, right? So Wizards of the Coast sweeps in. So Wizards of the Coast at this point is just this little upstart company that had been running from the early 90s. They were less than a decade old, but they were coming off of like 4 or 5 years of absolutely stratospheric profits from Magic the Gathering. The tabletop role-playing game industry, the tabletop gaming industry has never seen a product like Magic the Gathering. It completely changed tabletop gaming forever, and is still a dominant game to this day, and is still making the entire industry watch what they do, right? So at this point, Wizards of the Coast sees Dungeons & Dragons struggling, straining, and really in threat of dying as a company, right? TSR is like kind of in threat of, going bankrupt, right? And Wizards just comes in, sweeps in, and I think for tens of millions of dollars just purchases, TSR purchases everything, right? And the reality is the only significant thing that TSR really owned was Dungeons & Dragons. So TSR was purchased for Dungeons & Dragons. Wizards of the Coast picks up Dungeons & Dragons like a bauble, right? Now, the reality is this was incredibly important because this was a rescue. Wizards of the Coast rescues Dungeons & Dragons from TSR's arguably mismanagement of the game, right? And the reality is business is hard, and they hit a series of unfortunate turns of event, and they were never able to really pull themselves out of it, and it was a pretty bad situation, right? So at this point, Wizards of the Coast comes in. They own the game only for 2 years, 1997 to 1999, right? And honestly, I think they have really Wizards of the Coast has had very, very little impact on Dungeons & Dragons. However, nobody can forget for even a moment that it is quite possible that Dungeons & Dragons would not exist, and that TSR could have very well went out of business, and it's possible Dungeons & Dragons could have just faded away. You know what? Is that possible? I don't know. I don't think Dungeons & Dragons could have faded away at that point. It's possible if another company had success. It is possible. If another company had successfully launched a competitor, and that competitor, like Betamax and VHS, does anybody remember what Betamax is? You know what I mean? Like, it's possible, right? But the reality is, what Wizards of the Coast did was incredibly important, and it can never be forgotten, and we all owe a debt to Wizards of the Coast. All right, let's fast forward to 1999. Now, at this point, by the way, 2 years, that's less than 5% of the years that Dungeons & Dragons has been in existence. It was owned by Dungeons & Dragons. It was a blip. It was a tiny blip. It was critical because it rescued the game, because Wizards of the Coast rescued the game, but it was very, very short. Okay, let's talk about Hasbro. Hasbro, I say that the word connected to them is flourish. Okay, let's talk about that. All right, Hasbro buys Wizards of the Coast, lock, stock, and barrel. They own Wizards of the Coast outright. Right now, D&D was not the only thing they got with Wizards of the Coast. They got Magic the Gathering. They also got the rights to make the Pokemon tabletop, the Pokemon collectible card game, right? So basically, when Hasbro came looking for Wizards of the Coast, Wizards of the Coast was very valuable from MTG from Pokemon CCG, from Dungeons and Dragons, right? So I would love to tell you that Hasbro got them just because they wanted D&D, but the reality is D&D was just one thing they were getting from when they purchased Wizards of the Coast, right? Hasbro drops in, they now own Dungeons and Dragons, right? And the reality is, I think in 1999, Hasbro did not have much of a vision for Dungeons and Dragons, but it absolutely had expectations for Dungeons and Dragons, and that was to perform, right? So I think, the reality is under TSR, it's highly arguable that the business interests and the artistry were never married, right? That was never a successful marriage, right? There was constant strain during that entire 23 years. During the 2 years of Wizards of the Coast, right? Basically, I think Dungeons and Dragons team were able to do pretty much whatever they wanted, because the reality is, the people of the management and all the other people of Wizards of the Coast, they were just counting their checks. Like, they were just making so much money from Wizards, from Magic the Gathering, right? And they were about to get bought out by Hasbro, which meant there was going to be more checks for everybody as well, right? It's pretty amazing. Like, Wizards of the Coast executed extremely well, briefly, and did fantastically. They really did pretty amazingly, right? So Hasbro comes in, and they had expectations, right? Well, those expectations were met very, very quickly in the year 2000 when Hasbro released 3rd edition, right? Now, I think Wizards of the Coast started the work on that, but the reality is, once Hasbro was in, they had expectations for the game, right? And the reality, so at this point, you see 3E, you see 4E, you see 5E, right? And the reality is 3E was absolutely a huge success for Dungeons and Dragons, unmitigated. It is arguable that 3E has been the most, 3E was without a doubt. I think it's easy to say, I really think it's easy to say that 3rd edition was more successful from a monetary perspective than original edition, 1st edition, and 2nd edition, right? Each, not combined, but each, right? 3rd edition was incredibly strong. And then 5th edition is crushing it right now, right? So I'm not positive which was more influential from a monetary perspective, 3rd edition or 5th edition, but they're definitely the top 2 editions, in my opinion, right? 4th edition was, without a doubt, a serious misstep on the part of Hasbro. 4th edition, it sundered the community, and it was a serious, serious problem. But the reality is, because of the open gaming license, there was tremendous success under 3rd edition, and because Mike Morales came in and fixed the sundering that happened with 4th edition, the 4th edition 6 years is now becoming a footnote, right? Like, it's not that big a deal. It was an obstacle that was managed by Hasbro. That's the reality of it, right? And the reality is, with 3rd edition and 5th edition, arguably the 2 most successful of the 6th editions that exist of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm counting original edition in there, 1974 to 1977, right? You really see the game truly flourishing under Hasbro. Okay, now there are 2 things that has allowed the game to flourish extremely well under Hasbro. 1, the open gaming license. That is huge. The fact that Dungeons & Dragons, there was a period from 2000 to 2008 where Hasbro said, hey, Dungeons & Dragons is now open, and other companies can make source books and adventure modules for it. It was explosive. There had never been anything like it seen in all of the history of tabletop role-playing games. It was truly incredible, right? And so at that point, there was really, really significant growth from that situation, right? The other thing that really has made the game flourish incredibly under Hasbro is streaming. 5th edition has been the streaming edition. And frankly, Matt Mercer, it is the Matt Mercer effect. Matt Mercer is king of streamers, and the reality is he set the bar, and 1,000 people followed him, including me. I got a bunch of games on YouTube that you can watch me DMing Dungeons and Dragons much more poorly than Matt Mercer, right? Actually, I don't think I DM'd any more poorly than Matt Mercer, but I certainly didn't bring the full experience that his team did, right? Because he really has created a very dramatic, a very cinematic, a very technologically advanced, a very high quality streaming experience, right? And he literally did. He you want to talk about 1,000 points of light. He set the standard, and literally 1,000 streamers followed him, right? And you can find them all over YouTube, all over Twitch. Maybe there's a couple on Vimeo. But that's a big deal, and that has massively driven flourish during Hasbro. So Hasbro was there for the OGL, and they were there for streaming, and they kept Dungeons and Dragons safe, and they managed the obstacle that 4th edition was, right? So three owners, right? TSR, 1974 to 1997. Wizards of the Coast, 1977 to 1999. Hasbro, 1999 to 2019, right? And in addition to that, those three, their impact in the game boils down to these 3 words: Genesis, Rescue, Flourish. All that is my opinion, but I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think I got the 3 words right? What words would you attach to each one of them, right? Also, which of the companies do you think is the most important in the history of Dungeons & Dragons? I'll give them to you in my order. I think the order of importance is Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, TSR. Hasbro most important because it flourished. TSR, I would say TSR is second most important because it is the Genesis. And third is Wizards of the Coast. They did rescue it, that's important, but they owned it for just the merest, briefest moment, all right? So all that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.